Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. As was mentioned, my name is Daniel. I work at WikiTeq. I am also currently a master's student. I'm getting a degree in computer science. And I'll be talking about the considerations that apply if you're targeting a long-term support release. And this is from the perspective of, client relations, from the perspective of being a server administrator, and from the perspective of developing extensions. So we're going to start with some terms because I don't want to use abbreviations that no one understands. Then I will go over those three different perspectives, and then I will summarize and allow questions. You can see all the very fun graphics that Anton put. So first, when we talk about major and minor versions in MediaWiki, if you come from a semantic versioning background, MediaWiki does things a little bit differently. 1.34, 1.39, 1.43, these are each a major release, where 1 dot will just always be there as far as I'm aware. And then the minor releases about every 3 months, and that's 1.39.8 and then 1.39.10. So just when we're talking about a major versus a minor release, that's how that works for MediaWiki. An LTS release is a major release of MediaWiki that will be supported for slightly longer than most releases. I believe they're supported for 3 years because a new version comes out every 2 years and there's 1 year of overlap between the LTS releases. EOL is end of life. It is when a release is no longer supported. At the moment, 1.39 is supported, 1.42 is supported, but 1.21 isn't because that's very old. And then when we talk about stable code, that is what is documented as stable in MediaWiki's stable interface policy. They now have a policy, you said, okay, whether or not a class is stable to construct an instance of in your code versus just call a method on it, whether an interface you can implement it or you can just type against it. So that is the source of truth for what should be considered stable. A couple more. A bundled extension is what comes with MediaWiki when you download a release version. This includes things like abuse filter, math, some of the most popular extensions. It now includes, as of 1.43, I think it includes echo and thanks. Some of the most popular extensions that everyone will want. These are only special in that you don't need to download them separately. Other extensions can always be downloaded. PHP is a recursive acronym. It stands for PHP Hypertext Preprocessor. I've also seen it as PHP hates programmers. Your mileage may vary. The train is the process by which the Wikimedia Foundation deploys new versions of MediaWiki. Generally every week they do a new release of their internal versioning. It'll be 143 WMF9, WMF10. And this is deployed on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to successive groups of wikis. It reaches the English Wikipedia on Thursdays, and that'll come up later. And finally, there is this site that I'll be referencing called eval, written 3v4l, that allows testing code against a whole bunch of different versions of PHP. So you can find regressions and confirm that your code will work both on 7.4 and 8.1, for example. Now, having established that we're all seeing the same things when we read these terms, when you're a system administrator, here are some things that affect supporting long-term releases. Instead of doing a new upgrade every 6 months, you do one every 2 years. Every moving piece is a place where you can have some error, you can have some mistake. So if you only upgrade every 2 years, you have 75% fewer updates and 75% less room for error. On the other hand, you will have a lot less practice doing those updates. If you've done something every 6 months, you might recognize, oh, I've seen that error before, I know how to handle that. Oh, I checked out the wrong branch. Oh, I need to update to this specific patch version of PHP. And if you only update every 2 years, even if you are the same person doing the updates, every 2 years, you might not remember all those errors. And it might not be the same person if there's turnover in your company. LTS releases are generally paired with requiring a newer version of PHP. So that is another moving piece to add. If you are updating every 6 months, you can update PHP at some point between them. But if you are still running 7.4, for example, with your 1.39 wiki, when you update to 1.43, you need to update to PHP 8.1. As I think it was Jeffrey talked about earlier, with the foundation being a little different in what version of PHP they run, I came across this very, very great site with a bunch of quotes from various IRC chats related to Wikimedia and MediaWiki. So I think this applies also to dropping 7.4 support. The master version of core and extensions will continue to support 7.4 because that is what needs to run on the foundation servers. But if you are running a release of that, like 1.43, you don't have that luxury. You have to use a newer version of PHP. So those are some considerations if you're a system administrator. But what happens if you are doing the customer relations? Well, each release comes with new bundled features. And the less frequently you upgrade, the less frequently you get those features. You could always upgrade your extensions separately, but a lot of extensions will not support running a newer version of the extension on an older version of MediaWiki. And there can be a lot of subtle errors there. So, in the upgrade to 1.43 from 1.39, you will get discussion tools, echo, linter, login, notify, and thanks, all bundled. Some of these were bundled in the 1.43 release for the first time, but some of them were in 1.42 and before. If you don't want to need to worry about how to download other extensions and you only support the ones that are bundled, then these are features, some of which you could have had for your customers if you had upgraded to 1.42. Separate from the bundled extensions, there are also new features in the code that is already there. Core features. In 1.40, we got anonymous user preferences. You don't have that until you upgrade to 1.43 if you're on LTS. 1.41 added support for source maps in the resource loader modules. Resource loader is the system for front-end JavaScript and CSS that comes with MediaWiki. It's very fascinating, it's very performant, and I could give a whole talk on that. But the key part here is it's now easier to understand where errors come from on the client side because you can associate the minified version of code that is served on the front end with the original code files on the back end. Edit recovery. I think it was Megan who mentioned that one of the good features of the collab pads extension is, you can leave your edit and you can know that it'll be there when you come back if you haven't saved yet. That is a feature that exists in core and has existed for, I think, a year since 1.41. It's enabled on the test Wikipedia, but I don't know that it's been rolled out elsewhere on the foundation. But you don't need to install collab pads, you just need to upgrade to 1.41 to get that feature. 1.42 brought conditional default user preferences. If you want to change the defaults on your site, but you don't want all the existing users complaining, you can store, here's what the default was until this date, and here is what it is afterwards. And that simplifies changing your defaults. There's an update to the sanitizer for what CSS rules are allowed in inline styles in WikiText. Since 1.42, you could use the filter command in CSS. If you only update every LTS release, you're missing out. 1.42 also added support for the a newer, much newer, and still old version of JavaScript called ES6. Support for that in the in the wiki-wide common.js and common.css and in extension scripts. So again, Wikipedia gets new features every Thursday. If you see a new bug on Thursday that wasn't there on Wednesday, they have a page that's dedicated to explaining why. It's available at Wikipedia Thursday. And it's saying, hey, we just rolled out new code, so if there's a new feature you like, that's why. If there's a new bug you don't like, that's also why. And a long-term support release comes out every 2 years. So you are updating, if you update every long-term support release, that is a quarter as frequently as if you update to the just main releases 1.39, 1.40, 1.41, which is itself 26 times slower than how features roll out on the English Wikipedia, if I'm doing my math right. Now, in those bundled extensions that you had in 1.39, they also have their own new features that you would have gotten. In Abuse Filter, there is now a system for blocking domains very efficiently. This is working to replace the Spam Blacklist extension. In Confirm Edit, there's an entirely new CAPTCHA system, I believe, through Turnstile. In the Math extension, you can now add pop-ups that link to Wikibase entities regarding those equations. In syntax highlighting, you can now have syntax highlighting for wiki text. This on its own is enough reason to update. I believe this was available in 1.42, but yes, this came from someone working to implement a basic parser for wiki text in the upstream library that the extension uses. And my heart goes out to them because according to something I read on the internet, the first rule of parsing wiki text is don't parse wiki text. These are all features that you will have when you upgrade to 1.43, but you might have had sooner. Visual Editor has a new edit check system. There were also, I saw a number of patches improving the collaboration pad feature. I'm told apparently that feature doesn't really work, but apparently it will now error less. My assumption is people don't send patches to make it error more. Just going through the Git history. Improved parsoid support for a whole bunch of extensions. And these are extensions that are bundled from 1.39. So if you use the site extension, which is very easy to support because you don't need to download it, it's bundled. It now has better support for parsoid. Same with image map, which allows, when you have an image, you can make different parts of it link to different places. So, we have a picture of all of us here at the conference. If you click on me, it should go to my page, and if you click on Cindy, it should go to Cindy's page. And if you click on, I don't know, Brian, it'll go to Brian's page. It's a great extension that will now work better with the new parser. And Poem allows formatting poems where the indentation really matters. There is also improved in each of the skins that are bundled, support for night mode, if you are one of the people who prefers to read things in night mode. The Minerva I don't know how to pronounce that, and vector skins have that. So that is the considerations if you are doing customer support. You have to tell your customers, I know this feature came out on the English Wikipedia a couple weeks ago. It'll be released in a new major release of MediaWiki in 2 months, but you're not going to get it until we upgrade a year and a half from now to the newer long-term support version. Something you might need to say. Now, meat of the talk. If you are writing an extension and you want to target only long-term support versions, here are some things that will affect you when you're upgrading. The base assumption is, for 1.39, for example, your code should be perfect. Nothing that is used is documented as internal. Nothing that is used is documented as deprecated. Nothing is unstable. And again, these terms are from the stable interface policy. Basically, if you are running your code on 1.39 and it's perfect, there is nothing you shouldn't be doing. Upgrading to 1.43 is not going to be a walk in the park, even though it is the next long-term support version. And I don't know which policy this quote was about, but if it's the stable interface policy, then might be even harder. So, if you are running on 1.39, your code is on 1.39. From there to 1.40, there were 6 classes that were removed that were not previously deprecated, and there were 16 methods removed that were not previously deprecated, or unstable, or internal. If you went from 1.40 to 1.41, there were 3 classes that were not deprecated in 1.39, 48 methods. There were 2 class aliases removed, 1 global function. I'm sure you can read this for yourself. When you're jumping if you're jumping 1.39 to 1.41, you have to handle all of these just to resolve all the breaking changes. In 1.42, there were a whole bunch of additions. And 1.43 isn't out yet, but as of the branch commit that said, okay, master and 1.43 are no longer the same, we had a whole bunch that was removed. And there are still, I saw a couple of changes in Jarrett, however you want to pronounce that, that included breaking changes. So jumping from 1.39 with perfect code to 1.43, where you can still have all your deprecated stuff, just fixing the breaking changes, here's what you need to resolve. Mateus was talking earlier about dropping the legacy parser before the next long-term support version. There are 17 hooks that currently have a parser object as a parameter. I don't think all of those are deprecated. So if you have an extension that uses the parser for something, my guess is you will need to resolve a hook that is currently completely stable and available to use being removed entirely before the next long-term support version. Now, I want to talk about deprecations, because that was just the breaking changes. But there's also, deprecations, and not every breaking change can be deprecated in a manner that emits warning messages. Let's suppose you have this class, and unfortunately, there is a typo in the no cache constant that was originally declared. So we know how to deprecate do fetch. In that function, you send out a warning, WF deprecated, I think is the function call. But how would you deprecate accessing that constant? You can say, hey, this is deprecated. We'll put a comment on it, and we'll send out an email to the whatever mailing list. But eventually it'll be removed, and not everyone will have noticed that, oh, I wasn't supposed to be using that. There is a solution to that is coming in PHP 8.4, which is going to be released, I believe, November 21st. And that is the deprecated attribute. You can add this to method calls. Sorry, you can add this to methods, and it will emit warnings when that method is called. This code here will, on 8.4, complain. It'll issue a PHP user deprecated, e-user deprecated, hey, you're calling my method that you shouldn't be. And the design of the attribute system in PHP, which if you're not familiar with it, it's probably because it was added after 7.4 and thus isn't available for core use yet, is entirely backwards compatible in that in older versions of PHP that don't have attributes, hashtag open bracket deprecated, close bracket, will be parsed as a comment. And in versions that have attributes but that don't have the deprecated one, because attributes are validated at runtime if they are userland attributes, i.e. if they don't come from PHP itself, it'll just be ignored. So this code works using the eval tool from the website I mentioned earlier, works perfectly fine on every version since PHP 5.0. And if you remove the public keyword from public function, it will run on every version since 4.3.0. I was also able to test it individually on 4.2.0, 4.1.0, and PHP 4.0.6. For context, that came out in June of 2001. I was born in February of 2002. So I can confidently say that every PHP version since I've been alive will run this code fine. You can add these attributes to your code base, or, as I'm suggesting, to MediaWiki core, and there will be no errors. And once you are running a PHP version that understands it, there will be alerts of, hey, that's deprecated. But this is just equivalent to what you could do with WF deprecated messages. The real magic is that you can also do this on class constants. Accessing that class constant on PHP 8.4 will result in a similar deprecated message. And this is something you cannot do as it stands in MediaWiki Core. This works on every version since PHP 5. This works on PHP 7 and later. If you remove the public, it works on PHP 5 or later. 5.0.0 was released in July of 2004. I was 2.5 years old. I looked up some milestones. I think that's when I was first able to express complex sentences. Like, Grandma's at the supermarket. She's not here. It's been a while. You can add this to MediaWiki Core, and anyone who is running any reasonable version of PHP, it will work. It won't break. And if they're running 8.4 or later, it will also give them the warnings that we want. Now, there are some limitations to this. It does not work for global constants. This is from flagged revisions. They had a typo. Yes, they're missing an L in never blocked in the first one. And because these constants are intended for use by the end user in their local settings, it's kind of hard to deprecate them. Because if you just remove it, the end user server admin who is running their wiki will start seeing errors that they don't understand. Now you can deprecate them, or you could if the attribute worked for these. So that is something that hopefully will come in 8.5. No idea. It also doesn't work for class aliases. There are tools like Rector that allows mass replacing class aliases, but there's currently no way to emit deprecation warnings for those. And I know this was a pain point in the 1.35 to 1.39 upgrade. The MediaWiki test case class was removed. It had been an alias for its replacement. So, these are some considerations. If you are doing customer-facing support, you will have to deal with, hey, we're not getting that feature, not just until it's released in the next major version, but until it's released in the next long-term support version, which could be, a year and a half or longer. You have to compare that with people see this feature clearly works. It's on the English Wikipedia. They get updates every Thursday. If you are a server admin and you do your updates every 2 years instead of every 6 months, you can be out of practice or never had that practice if there was too much turnover in your company. And if you are an extension developer, there are a whole lot more breaking changes if you go from one version that's long-term supported to the next instead of just from one major version to the next. So I personally would suggest targeting major releases, each one, not waiting every 2 years, but waiting every 6 months. It's more work in the short term, but it means your code will be more stable, your clients can get access to new features, and you will have more institutional knowledge on how to perform the updates. Questions?
Extensions that come bundled and have had updates since 1.39 was released. Just wanted to clarify.
This?
Yeah, exactly. So wouldn't you be able to just install these updated extensions yourself, or are these extensions requiring you to be on 1.40?
So my understanding, and every extension can have a different policy about it, is that, let's say blocked external domains was added to the abuse filter extension in the 1.41 release cycle. I don't think that version of abuse filter supports running on a 1.39 wiki. It might require a hook that was only introduced in 1.40 or 1.41. It might call a method that hadn't been available yet. Generally, extensions have one of three support policies. Either the latest version supports a whole bunch of previous versions of MediaWiki core, which is fairly uncommon, or each version of MediaWiki that is branched, 1.40, 41, 42, also creates a branch in the extension, and that is the version of the extension that you want to run. So for abuse filter, you would run the 1.39 branch of the extension for 1.39 core. Or long-term support compatibility is when a new version comes out, but every 2 years instead of every 6 months, and is associated with the LTS releases. So unless the extension has the policy where the latest version is compatible with prior versions of core, you should not be able to, or you shouldn't, and you are unlikely to be able to run newer versions of extensions on older versions of core.
So all these features you listed here are incompatible with 1.39?
All these features were introduced since the 1.40 development cycle began. I don't know the policy of each of the extensions regarding if they support running a new version of the extension on an old version of core. You know, we don't support running Visual Editor 1.43 on MediaWiki Core 1.35 because the extension expects some things that are available that weren't at that time.
Yeah, this raises a lot of questions about backporting and the best way to manage these things, because technically speaking, we don't have to stick to the bundled extensions version, but we're running slow on time, right? So I'll just ask you offline, but thanks for the clarification.
It sounded like you were recommending for extension writers to be on a non-LTS cycle and improve the extension's compatibility every 6 months, right?
Yes.
What about for your own wiki? Let's say you're a wiki administrator.
If you are the server admin and you have also written extensions that are like running on that, I would say that yes, you should try and update them, because incremental updates are likely to be less painful than doing 4 versions of upgrades all at once.
You may have extensions running on your wiki that are on an LTS support cycle.
I mean, if it's not an option, then you shouldn't do it. But if it's an option, I recommend every 6 months spending a couple hours updating your, or more, updating your extensions.
How do you feel about even numbered versions?
What do you mean?
Like, would you say to release on, or like to update on a yearly cycle and target only the odd numbered versions, or do you also think?
Given that the versions, the non-long-term support versions aren't long-term supported, I think if you aren't going to update every 6 months, you may run into challenges where the version in the middle, 1.41, I don't know if that is still supported right now. If 1.41 is? Okay. So it is still supported, but I would expect that the long-term support versions have more support than the versions that are going to be dropped after 8 months or however long they're supported. Obviously, your mileage may vary, and if you can decide that for yourself, if you don't have the time to update every 6 months, but you agree that waiting 2 years is a recipe for disaster, then you can do it every year. I would suggest targeting the odd versions instead of the even ones, given that the odd versions are the ones that include long-term support. But yes.
Last question?
Okay.
Thank you.